Today, we're going to talk about the horrifying truth behind this infamous photo. But before we get started, welcome to True Crime with Maneater. If you love all things true crime, including missing person cases, cold cases, and just the strange happenings of the world, you've come to the right place. Be sure to subscribe and turn on alerts so you never miss a video upload. Let's get started. This now somewhat infamous photo is a photo of Jeffrey Franklin. March 10th, 1998 started off as just a typical day in a middle-class neighborhood known as Camelot Drive in Huntsville, Alabama. No one could ever imagine that this quaint neighborhood would become the scene of a brutal crime scene. 17-year-old Jeffrey Franklin would wait for his parents to get home before brutally attacking them. He would also go on to try to murder 3 of his siblings. Based on the crime scene, police were able to determine that Jeffrey first started by attacking his mother, Cynthia, with what they called a rat tail file. He would then go on to attack his 14-year-old sister with a hatchet. He would slash at her throat, and then he began to club her with it. His father, Gerald Franklin, was attacked as he was walking in the door. He was beat to death with a sledgehammer. Jeffrey Franklin would then take his rage out on 2 of his younger siblings, his little brothers aged 9 and 6. They had wounds to their throat and quite a few head injuries. As these brutal murders are occurring on March 10th, 1998, a little girl hears a high-pitched scream and a dog barking excessively. So she wanders up the driveway of the Franklin home and she would see a little boy laying out in the yard covered in blood. And as this little girl is taking in the scene, Jeffrey Franklin, who is 17, comes outside and he is covered in blood. He is shirtless, he has blood all over him, and he tried to grab the little girl, but luckily she fought him and got away. And she ran as quickly as possible to her home. And the girl gets home and the police are called. So obviously Jeffrey Franklin knows the police are going to be on their way any second now. So he jumps in his car and tries to make a getaway. And when police arrive, they are met with a bloodbath. The house is covered in blood. There's murder weapons everywhere. And when police arrived, they had only arrived with 1 ambulance. And there are 5 people in that house who have been attacked. They didn't know that they were responding to a murder scene. They thought they were responding to an injured child. When they went into the house and they saw what happened, even the most seasoned police officers were in complete distress. One of them said, after 16 years on the force, this is the absolute worst crime I've ever seen. And obviously by the time police arrived on scene, Jeffrey Franklin had already fled. He jumped in his car and he got away. So they put out an APB, which is an all points bulletin, and Jeffrey Franklin is found actually rather quickly. And he would lead police on a car chase through these quaint neighborhoods. And as police are trying to get Jeffrey Franklin to pull over, he's attempting to run them off the road. He's running into their cars. He successfully actually ran one police car off the road and into a ditch, and he has no plans of slowing down anytime soon. The chase only ended when Jeffrey Franklin ran into a fence, and as they get him out of the vehicle and they handcuff him, he's bloody, he's shirtless, and he's laughing at the reporters, and he's spitting at police, and he's cursing, and he's making this huge scene. And because Jeffrey was shirtless, they're looking at his stomach and they notice that he has a pitchfork and a pentagram carved into him. And so obviously police throw him in the back of the police car, which is where this infamous picture comes from. He's smiling, he looks thrilled, he's happy with what he's done.
Responders survey the damage, taking account of victims and survivors. They're busy working, but the reality and the horror seeps in.
It's one of the worst in 25 years. Yes, it was one of the worst things.
Don Webster says HIMSI rescuers on the scene of the brutal attack have been undergoing routine counseling to come to grips with what they witnessed just over a week ago. Perhaps the best medicine comes with word from the family that at least 2 of the Franklin children may be on the road to recovery. She says survivors are often forgotten about in the rush to help the victims, but now, without her parents, her older brother charged with their murder, 11-year-old Stacy Franklin is getting help from the hospital as well.
And at the crime scene at his home, police are working actively to figure out what the hell happened. His parents were pronounced dead on scene, while the 3 siblings he attacked, Sarah, Timothy, and Christopher, are being rushed to the hospital, and they are in critical condition. Their throats were slashed at, they have head injuries, severe head injuries, and they lost a lot of blood. Miraculously, all 3 siblings survived, although they had life-changing injuries that they now had had to live with because of their brother. Jeffrey did have another sister who was 11 years old, but she wasn't home during the time of the attack. But obviously after the attack, she was traumatized. She had PTSD. She had to receive quite a bit of counseling to cope with what her brother did. And their aunt actually went on to say that they're doing pretty good, and she decided early on that they wouldn't talk about what happened unless the children themselves wanted to talk about it, and that it would only be on their terms. And now that Jeffrey's arrested and he's being interviewed by police, the house is an active crime scene, so police are in there, forensics are in there, and they're finding some really disturbing things. Investigators would go on to say that in the interview, Franklin was kind of up and down with his moods, and he really didn't volunteer much information. And at one point, an investigator drew a diagram of the house, and he pointed to Franklin and said, "Where was the last time you seen your family members?" And he did this as a way to try to figure out, obviously, who he attacked first, where he attacked them, and things like that. Jeffrey Franklin actually took the pencil the investigator offered him, and he started to draw a circle around the entire diagram of the house. And he just kept drawing it and just going and going in that circle repetitively. And then he put the pencil down, stood up, he got verbally abusive, and just started shouting at the investigator. And that ended the interview. And as they are investigating this case, they realized some really disturbing truths. One of them being that Jeffrey Franklin had been up for 3 days straight prior to these murders. This was because he had recently been diagnosed with ADHD, and he was prescribed quite a few things. The doctor had prescribed him Ritalin, Prozac, and Klonopin. So Ritalin is actually used to treat ADHD symptoms. Prozac is an antidepressant. Klonopin is actually used for a variety of things. It can be used to treat seizures, panic disorders, anxiety, and a movement disorder. And Franklin admitted to abusing this medication. Oftentimes he would take up to 4 Ritalin at a time, but he wouldn't just take the pills, he would snort them, which is going to have some serious adverse effects. Franklin's mother knew of his abuse and actually kept them in a lockbox. What she didn't know is Jeffrey had actually figured out how to get into that lockbox, and when he would take a pill, he would replace it with something else. So his mother never actually noticed that he was abusing his medication. And Jeffrey Franklin's attorney went on to say that drug abuse like this can make somebody go in psychosis. This can ramp up somebody to do a crime like this. While investigators feel like that is true, they kind of believe that it just shifted the gears into notion, meaning he was thinking about doing it already, and this kind of just made him go through with it. And a blood test that was done 12 days after he had been arrested showed that he had 10 times the normal amount of Ritalin in his system. And classmates of Jeffrey Franklin would go on to share some dark things about him. They said he was involved in devil worship. One student said that he was a really smart and nice person up until 2 years ago, and he just became a completely different person, but they really don't know why. He just had a different attitude. He seemed darker and angry. He was always in a bad mood, and he had a very short temper. And she described an incident in their government class when they had a discussion about God in government, and whatever he said made her believe that he was absolutely a devil worshiper. Another student would say that he often threatened to put spells on people, and that he often talked about doing drugs, especially Ritalin. And then they found out that Jeffrey Franklin's mother, Cynthia, had been talking to her colleagues about her 17-year-old son. She told her colleagues that he had been causing the family a lot of problems over a year and a half. She told one colleague that the situation had become out of hand. And Cynthia actually told one of her colleagues that a pastor told her that Jeffrey was just in a passing phase, that eventually he would grow out of this phase, he would kind of go back to normal, and everything would be okay. And when police found his notebook while they were searching the house, they realized just how dark and terrifying Jeffrey Franklin really was. He wrote a lot about satanic rituals and sexual torture, and that Satan wanted him to kill his family. He went on to write, "I know Dad will be home at this time, and I'll wait by the front door behind the little hutch, and I'll hit him with a hammer. Mom will be out on a walk when she comes back. I'll have the radio playing loudly. I'll call Mom in the room and ask her what's on the agenda for today. Then I'll kill her. And what about my brothers and sisters? Well, I'll take them, I'll strangle my little brother in his room, and I'll lure my other little brother into his room and strangle him. Then my sister, I will rape her, and I will finish her off." Those words are Jeffrey Franklin's own words and found in his journal. And they are so dark and so disturbing. And he had been visiting a psychiatrist. His parents were actively trying to get him help. They were treating his ADHD. They were treating his depression. They just didn't know that he was abusing these pills. They thought that keeping the pills in a lockbox was the way to prevent him from doing so. And Jeffrey did tell the police that he was in the house, but didn't admit to attacking his family. He said that some evil being had taken over his body and attempted to kill his whole family. And although Jeffrey Franklin said that some being took over his body and made him murder his family, in a notebook entry, he wrote that if they catch me, I can trick the stupid judges and plead insanity, get off in 2 months' time and be set free again. So Jeffrey Franklin wrote that he was going to plead insanity. He had planned this crime. He knew that he was going to have to pretend to be insane and trick the judges and trick the jury. And he wrote it in his own handwriting in his journal. So did a being take over him? Was he in a psychosis? It doesn't seem plausible. So there was a fair amount of writing in that journal, not only about the devil and devil worship and sexual torture, but he planned the crime in those notebooks. He planned on what he was going to do after he committed the crime and what he really intended to do after he just completed this murder. And I haven't been able to find a significant amount of journal entries. I don't think they've been released, but the ones that are out there are really disturbing. There's a lot of kind of disturbing images, a lot of disturbing things in the journal. And of course, this is going to go to trial. And it was supposed to actually be a death penalty case. But on the eve of the trial date, Jeffrey Franklin entered a guilty plea. He pleaded guilty to 2 counts of murder and 3 accounts of attempted murder. He received 5 life sentences, and I think he did this because it was actually going to be a death penalty case, and he realized that he didn't want to take the chance. I firmly believe that if this case had went to trial, he would have received a death sentence. And I think he knew that as well. So this case from the beginning had national attention because of Jeffrey Franklin's actions, because of how aggressive he was, because when he was arrested, he was covered in blood, he was shirtless, he had carvings in his chest, he was yelling, he was cursing, he was spitting at a photographer, he was smiling in the back of a police car. So there was a lot of national attention. And then there would be a lot of renewed attention on this case because in June of 2016, he was eligible for parole. And if you're like me, you're wondering why in the world would somebody like Jeffrey Franklin be eligible for parole? Well, according to Alabama law, a person who is serving life imprisonment is parole eligible after serving 15 years in prison. And of course, not only was this a sensational story because of this small town murder and Jeffrey Franklin's actions, but also during the 80s and 90s, people were really concerned with devil worshipping and devil worshipping murders. So obviously when this 17-year-old boy is claiming that the devil made him do it and he was obsessed with devil worship and torture and all of these things, it's going to be a sensational story. So sometime after Jeffrey Franklin's arrest, he actually became a Christian. It was mentioned that after the drugs cleared out of Jeffrey Franklin's system, he was stunned by what happened. I can't say that I fully believe that, especially looking at those journal entries and him saying like, I'm gonna fool the judge and I'm gonna be out on the streets again, and he planned this whole murder. And of course we can assume that he was snorting Ritalin when he was writing that stuff, but we don't know for sure. So we do know that Jeffrey Franklin was a troubled teen. He had been very suicidal, and while he's in prison, he has spent most of his time in a mental health unit. So Robert Tootin actually represented Jeffrey Franklin during this time, and he went on to say that Jeffrey Franklin was a troubled teenager. He had some deep-rooted psychological issues. He even said that some of those were probably hereditary. He also stated that Jeffrey Franklin kind of just slipped through the cracks as far as being able to get the proper help that Jeffrey Franklin actually needed. He said that a lot of people in Jeffrey Franklin's life missed a lot of significant warning signs about his condition. This kind of sits wrong with me because, again, Jeffrey Franklin's parents had sent him to a psychiatrist. They were actively getting him the help that he needed. In 2013, Jeffrey Franklin actually wrote a letter to the judge who sentenced him. He wanted to ask the judge to give him credit for the 3 years served at Madison County Jail, as the court had originally ordered, and he wanted this to happen because it would move up his parole date. And the letter states, I'm not really a bad man. I didn't mean to do what I did. It just happened. I have a hard time. My parents always told me just do your best, and no one can expect more than that. And all a man has is his word. I try to honor my parents' memory, even though they are sadly deceased, to obey their words of wisdom even now, and thus do what is right. It helps me feel better about my past to do things better and help others, although it gets very hard at times given where I am. My Alabama DOC timesheets to this day do not reflect my jail credit. I am fully compliant with my mental health treatment and the prison regulations and doing my best to try to be the best person I can be to stay out of trouble. And that's actually the first time that anyone had really heard from Jeffrey Franklin in quite some time. His former lawyer went on to say that the whole letter is quite rambling and he doubts it'll do any good. He said, it certainly gives me some pause as to what his mental status is at the moment. So even when he wrote that letter to the judge and the judge received it and his lawyer read it, it, his lawyer is still questioning kind of his mental status at the time. And I think that says a lot about Jeffrey Franklin even today. And in the letter, Franklin actually goes on to talk about a fight he had with another inmate. He said that this man was 300 pounds and that it was very brutal, but he also says that life goes on. If you actually go and look at the letter, you can see just how messy it is. You can see that it's like barely punctuated, so he has these really long run-on sentences. It's kind of a lot to take in. But the gist of it is that he believes that the 3 years he served in the county jail should apply to his 15 years so that he can bump up his parole date. And in that letter, he did say that he has had 6 infractions since being in jail. One is for trying to harm himself, the other is for getting in a fight. I couldn't really make out what the other ones were about, but one was talking about when he had a seizure or something of the sort. It's just really hard to work through. I do agree with what his lawyer said, that if that's a reflection of his mental state, then that kind of gives him pause and a little bit of worry. So Jeffrey Franklin does want to get out of prison. He does want to see the light of day again. And I feel like we should all be a little bit horrified by that notion. It doesn't seem like he is doing that much better. He may have found Christianity. He may be taking his meds properly, but I think there is something kind of deeply wrong with him. His siblings who did survive the attack are living in New York with relatives, and they are said to be doing pretty well. And Jeffrey Franklin's lawyer actually said that Jeffrey has been in contact with his siblings, the ones he tried to murder and the sibling that wasn't home at the time. So they are in contact, they are communicating. We can only speculate on why. I'm sure they have a lot of unanswered questions, and I don't blame them. I mean, their brother brutally murdered their parents and attacked 3 of them. They are living with life-altering injuries. It's completely sad and devastating. I hope that Jeffrey Franklin gives them honest answers to the best of his ability, because they deserve that. I also want to note that Jeffrey Franklin doesn't seem to take accountability in that letter. When I read it a couple of times, I felt like he kept blaming the drugs and all of that stuff instead of taking accountability for his actions, for the murder of his parents and the attempted murder of his siblings. Of course, the drugs probably played a part into it, but he's still kind of pushing off that accountability. Even when he mentioned his parents in the letter, he said they're deceased. He didn't say when I killed my parent. And I think that kind of speaks volumes, that he's really kind of removed himself from the crime. But that's it for today, guys. If you like this video or any other video on my channel, be sure to subscribe and turn on alerts so you never miss a video upload. See you next time.